Well, for more on the complicated legacy of Fidel Castro, we're joined by phone with Senator Marco Rubio. Senator Rubio, thank you for joining us. I want to ask you, you've called Fidel Castro evil, murderous dictator who inflicted misery and suffering on his people. Senator Rubio, do you feel that Fidel Castro should be forgiven?
Forgiven? Well, first of all, to be forgiven, you have to ask for forgiveness. And I don't think Fidel Castro's ever apologized for anything that he did. So I'm not sure what the forgiveness is about. Number two is, while Fidel Castro is dead, the dictatorship is not. He has not really governed for the better part of 10 years. His brother took over, and they've continued many of the same policies and practices. In fact, even as I'm speaking to you now, there are reports from the island that there are dissidents and opposition leaders that are being rounded up and detained to ensure that they don't cause any trouble, even though these people just peacefully march down the street. These are not armed groups or anything like that. So to go back to your original question, I mean, you don't forgive someone who didn't ask for forgiveness. You don't forgive someone who didn't ever think they did anything wrong.
Your Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell today referred to Castro's death as an opportunity for Cuba. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that the reality of it is that he hasn't really governed for the better part of 10 years. He got very sick in 2006 and almost died. Has largely been incoherent for the last 3 to 4 years. For the most part, they've kind of kept him from the public eye because of that. His brother has been governing, and their goal is to create their system of government and leave it permanent. I mean, his brother's over 80 years old as well, so it's not like this is a country run by a bunch of young people. The revolutionary generation, as they call themselves, are all over 80. So you're going to have a lot of these sorts of announcements coming up over the next 5 to 6 years. And the question is, what will follow them? Will it be a new generation of leadership that understands that Cuba cannot move forward unless it opens up to its people in the world? Or is it people who decide we got a pretty good thing going here? You know, we're in power, we're in charge, and we don't want to change the system of government because it guarantees us that we stay in power.
When you ran for president, you said that you would roll back the Obama administration's moves to reestablish ties with Cuba. President-elect Donald Trump has said that he would do the same. Does the death of Fidel Castro change that in any way?
No, it was an ongoing process. And I would say to you that we are going to, as I've encouraged the White House to do, the new White House, re-examine our policy towards Cuba with an eye towards what our goal is. And our goal in Cuba is to, number one, protect America's national interests, and number two, as part of that first goal, to do everything possible in our policy to incentivize and pave the way for a democratic opening on that island. And we should re-examine all of our policies towards Cuba and ask ourselves, does it further that goal or not further that goal? And that's what I would encourage us to continue to do.
You just told me a short while ago you don't believe that Fidel Castro should be forgiven, but despite all the suffering Castro has caused, some world leaders have praised Castro today. Pope Francis expressed his sorrow. This is not the usual response to the death of a dictator. What do you think that is, that people have just not forgotten?
Well, I don't know why that is. You'll have to ask each of these individual leaders. Some of these people you're talking about are people that have never had to live near him or anywhere around him or have been impacted by what he's done. Others, quite frankly, have anti-American sentiments and have always viewed Fidel Castro as a person who stood up to America. And others, quite frankly, are left-leaning. They just agree with his ideology. I promise you that if this was a right-wing dictator, which I don't necessarily excuse, but a right-wing dictator who had done what he did, this would not be the reaction that you would be getting. So again, each of these people will have to account for their own level of hypocrisy and how they ignore the fact that he jailed and executed and murdered people. As recently as 1996, American citizens, civilian pilots, were shot down over international airspace, an unarmed aircraft by their MiG-29s. That would not have happened without the direct order and permission of Fidel Castro, something he was never held to account for. So again, you'll have to ask these leaders why they're hypocrites, but I can tell you that he is not a heroic figure in any way. And in fact, I think will go down, if history has an honest assessment of him, as one of the most brutal dictators the Western Hemisphere has ever known.
What advice would you give President-elect Trump on Cuba-U.S. relations?
To examine all of our policy towards Cuba with an eye towards our goal. What's in our national interest as a country, America? That's our first obligation. And I think as part of our national interest is to have a Cuba that is stable and free. If Cuba is not stable and free, it will continue to be a source of mass migration. It will continue to be a source of economic crimes, where you have people coming from Cuba stealing money from Medicare and then going back to Cuba when we're about to catch them and living there. It will continue to be a source of anti-American activity. This is the same Cuba that just a couple years ago was caught helping North Korea invade international sanctions. So our goal for Cuba should be democracy and freedom because it's in our national interest, the right thing, and our policy should reflect that.
Senator Marco Rubio, thank you very much for joining us, Senator.
Thank you.